All right.
Hi, Jeanette.
Hi. Here we go.
Let's do it.
Okay, we like having a live audience, so I'm telling you now that we are going to ask you if you have questions for Neil, so start thinking about them. We'll do that towards the end. Okay, ready?
Ready.
Let's talk about the economy. What is going on? And I really thought interest rates would be lower. By now I was promised lower interest rates. When is this happening?
You were promised lower interest rates. You will get lower interest rates. It's just going to take a little longer than we expected. So we have two things that are happening at the same time. The first is the economy is incredibly strong. When you think about demand for goods and services, it continues to be a hot economy. And you see that in the gross domestic product numbers. You see that overall. It's also the case, in part because of that demand, that prices are high. And so the rate of inflation, the rate at which prices are growing, has slowed, but it hasn't slowed to where the Federal Reserve or frankly any of us want it to slow down to. And so if you look at the numbers for the first 3 months of this year, they were higher than we anticipated. And that means the Federal Reserve is going to have to keep interest rates a little bit higher, a little bit longer to make sure that we get inflation under control.
How is that translating for small businesses?
Well, it's the cost of borrowing, right? And so if we think about the interest rate impact, whether you're using your credit card, whether you're going to the local bank, the cost of acquiring money is just more expensive today. You also have to think about planning. If you're making a major investment in your business, equipment or land, and you're borrowing to do that, you really have to do the math to figure out what your anticipated return is at those higher cost of money and inputs. And of course, the other problem, I think, for all businesses, but it's particularly true for small businesses, is you have to figure out your anticipation of how much higher prices might go and how you might be able to either absorb the higher prices of your goods and the labor that you employ, and how much of that you can pass along. And that's tricky. And that's one of the reasons that inflation is so frustrating for all businesses, but in particular for small businesses.
Thank you. So tax season, just over now, although...
Death and taxes, both are certain.
Right.
Yeah.
And if you're a small business, it's always tax season, so you're already thinking about your next quarterly report. But there are some things happening with tax legislation that small businesses should know about. So can you go through a couple of those things?
Yeah, the most important thing that's going on right now is if your small business has research and development expenses. So this is particularly true if you're in the manufacturing sector, or maybe you're in construction and engineering. Probably some of your expenses as a business have been classified as research and development. And it used to be the case that your R&D expenses were deductible just like any other business expense. And so just like you would deduct the salary for the person on the manufacturing line, you would deduct the salary for the person who was contributing to your research and development. There was a change in the tax law, and it's one of these Washington things where all the politicians promised us, this will never go into effect. Well, lo and behold, it went into effect, and what it said is that businesses have to amortize those expenses over 5 years. So to put it simply, if you're spending $100,000 on research and development, rather than being able to deduct that as a normal business expense, you have to spread it out over 5 years, which means you only get to deduct $20,000 in year one, and you have to pay taxes on the rest of it. The House of Representatives earlier this year passed legislation not only to reverse that, but importantly, to make it retroactive. So a lot of small businesses who have R&D expenses had to pay those extra taxes this past April, whenever they filed for last year. This bill would retroactively do that. By the way, that means you could apply and get a refund if this impacted you. The problem is that this bill's got to pass the U.S. Senate. And it's pending in the Senate. Our hope is that this will get a vote in May. If it gets a vote, I think it'll pass. The president's already said he will sign it, and this will be real savings to all those small businesses who have R&D expenses.
And for people here who may not remember all of that, their accountant should be able to help them through that.
I bet it was a very painful conversation with the accountant because for a lot of people, it was a surprise tax bill. And, all tax bills are bad, but surprise tax bills are probably the worst.
What else is going on that we need to know about for 2025?
Yeah, so this is, if that's a big issue, and it is for a business with an R&D, there's an even bigger issue on the horizon. You all may remember, it doesn't feel like that long ago, but in 2017, Congress enacted a big comprehensive tax reform bill. It really impacted all taxpayers and all businesses. So if you happen to be a corporate entity, it lowered the corporate tax rate. If you're just a tax-paying individual, it lowered the rates, it increased the standard deduction. Importantly, if you're a pass-through businesses, which most small businesses are, you're an S-corp, you're a partnership, you're a sole proprietorship, it lowered your taxes. And it did that by both lowering the individual rates and creating what's called the 20% pass-through deduction, which effectively operates as a lower rate. The problem is all of those reforms expire December 31st, 2025. And so to put it into context, the top marginal tax rate for most small businesses will, at the stroke of midnight, go from 29.6% to 39.6%. That is a huge tax increase. And in addition, whatever income you have as a family, as an individual, you also see those tax rates go up. So Congress has to do something about this. If Congress doesn't act, the tax increases automatically occur. We need Congress to extend the provisions that were enacted in 2017. This will be the major topic of discussion in Washington, D.C. in calendar year 2025. And if passed as prologue, Congress will wait till the very last moment to figure out what to do. So it's going to create lots of uncertainty as we lead up to that moment, but it's something that we're very focused on. We're already up lobbying members of Congress saying, you got to do this, and you got to do it fast. The last thing we need is threatening people with that big of a tax increase who are just trying to run their businesses.
And you and I will keep talking about this throughout the year.
Absolutely.
So we'll keep you up to date. Hiring. And kind of skill shortages is the headline. Small businesses are still struggling with hiring. Yeah. What are you seeing there in terms of workforce shortage?
Well, it's persistent. And so, I said at the beginning that the economy is strong, and part of that means that we have a lot of demand for labor to staff businesses. And that's occurring precisely at the moment where we're really feeling the effects of demographic changes in the United States. The retirement of the baby boom generation, kind of smaller generations kind of coming behind it. We don't have the same natural growth in the workforce that we've had for the last 40 or 50 years. So to kind of quantify how that works when you think about hiring, it used to be the norm that in any given month in the United States, we had more people looking for work than we had advertised open jobs. And so they're not always, there's skills mismatches, location mismatches, but in general, we had a ready labor supply. Right before the pandemic, we saw the first shocks of that demographic shift. For the first time on any given month, we would have more open jobs than we had people looking for work. Now that got distorted in the first few months of the pandemic, but since then, that has been the norm today. So today, this month, for every about 100 open jobs that we have in the United States, we only have 75 people who are out looking for work. And so it's not just a skills mismatch, this person mismatch, just the number of people that we have, unfortunately, is likely going to be the new normal. So we got to do things to make sure people have the right skills for the right jobs. We may need to make sure that jobs and people are located in the same places or can be done virtually. But this demographic mismatch is going to be with us for a while.
Yeah, so that takes me right into my next question, which is to talk about AI, which we'll be talking about a lot more later in this event. But you really see AI as a solution to at least part of this problem. Can you talk about that?
I do, because when you think about how do you meet that demand if you can't always meet it with labor, well, you get more efficient. And so this has always been the case in the United States. So, how did Henry Ford make the automobile affordable to everyday Americans? He got really efficient in figuring out how to make automobiles, and he created the assembly line. And so our entire history is really one example after another of how we figure out how to do things more efficiently so that we can meet demand, lower prices, and increase our standard of living. Today, the real opportunity that exists is in artificial intelligence. And so some people, get scared of the word or what it might mean, but it's kind of like the personal computer and then the internet and now artificial intelligence. Is just a way to do things faster at scale with less human input, and that makes us more efficient. And what that's going to do is help businesses of all sizes meet demand. But I'm particularly excited about what it means for small business.
Yeah. This next topic, we've been writing about this on Co for months, and I still don't understand it, so I really hope that you can help explain it. There's been a change in how regulators, look, I have to actually read the question because that's how confusing I think it is. There's been a change in how regulators require companies to categorize independent contractors and gig workers. Yes. So 1099, casually we would call them 1099 workers, referring to the form they get at the end of the year. Yeah. This is so important for small businesses because they rely on these people. Can you explain what the change is? Yeah,
so this has been bouncing around in the states, but it kind of showed up at the federal level. And in the prior administration, in the Trump administration, they tried to provide greater clarity for when someone is an employee or when they permissibly can be an independent contractor. And that's really important because under longstanding federal law, if you take someone who should technically be considered an employee and misclassify them as an independent contractor, you can be liable for taxes, wages, other benefits, et cetera. So there's a legal liability that can attach to getting the decision wrong. So what we all want to see then is if there's legal liability, make it a really clear distinction. Like, don't create lots of gray and clouds and questions. So the prior administration did that, and they had a pretty simple test. It was all about the control that the business exercised over the individual and whether or not the individual had the opportunity to pursue other work with someone else. And so, if you're a carpenter, for example, and the employer doesn't exercise control over you, and you can take your carpentry services to work for someone else at the same time, you could be an independent contractor. That simple test was replaced by the current Biden administration with this 6/7 factor test that is called a totality of the circumstances and includes phrases like reserve control. So you're not actually exercising control over the employee, but you might reserve the ability to exercise control. It gets even worse when you think about it in practical standpoints. Well, what does control mean? A lot of workplaces today have safety rules. And so you might say that if you come into our place of business, these are the rules that you follow because this is what keeps our employees and our customers safe. If those rules go beyond what might be required by government, that could be a factor in determining control, and therefore the person could be classified not as an independent contractor, but as an employee. It is so confusing, it creates so much uncertainty that the U.S. Chamber, along with other business organizations, have gone to court. We have challenged the Department of Labor, they're the agency who issued this, their rule, and we're currently waiting a decision from the court to try to invalidate this rule to return back to the standard. And so until we effectively achieve that, we've created a lot of uncertainty. It's not clear to me at the moment that the Department of Labor is aggressively trying to enforce that. We're encouraging them not to and let the court case play out, but that's what's at stake right now.
Great. I'm going to ask Neil one more question, but then I'm going to come to the audience. So start to think about what your questions are, and someone with a mic will come to you if you raise your hand when I give you the cue. My last scripted question for you. But this is really important. So there is a new regulation, a new law that a lot of people don't know about. It's called the Beneficial Ownership Information Report. You have to file this report that has a very long name that I can never remember. Tell us what it is and what small businesses are required to do.
Yeah, so maybe a word about why Congress did this. A few years ago, Congress passed a new law, and it's called beneficial ownership. And their concern was that the bad guys, criminals, drug traffickers, kind of other folks, could be using businesses essentially as front companies to hide the activities. And so that you would have, you've probably read stories about this, like this company is owned by this company that's owned by this company that's owned by this company that's registered as a company in the Cayman Islands, and no one knows who is who, and it's all like, bad guys hiding their nefarious activities. So Congress' solution to that was, well, let's make everybody, virtually, disclose who their ownership is. And so if you have more than I believe it's a 25% ownership, or if you exercise control over a business, that has to be registered and disclosed with the government. This is particularly targeted not at big corporations that are publicly traded, but to LLCs, to partnerships, to sole proprietorships. If your business was formed and registered with your state prior to 2024, then you have this year, till January 1st, 2025, to file that information with the government. Who the owners are, who has this interest in it. If you start a new business today, you have 90 days to file this information. Thankfully, the information is not that complicated kind of once you get to it, but you have to figure out, does this apply to you? Where do you file it? What exactly is the information that needs to be disclosed? Thankfully, CO has some really great kind of one-page fact sheets, kind of Q&A, so you can figure out if this applies to you. In some instances, tax preparers have been helping companies figure this out. But if you happen to have a business, you're an LLC, partnership, et cetera, and your tax preparer hasn't talked to you about this, you need to go look into this. You need to figure out if it applies to you, because once the deadline passes, if you're found to willfully have refused to file this information, it's $500 per day. And then at some point it can actually become criminal. So this is not something to mess around with. Get in front of it, file the form, and then get back to running your business.
Yeah. So CO, growwithco.com. Come read the article on how to do that. Okay, I am ready to take an audience question. Do we have any audience questions? Does anyone have their hand up? Anyone? I see someone over here.
Yes, ma'am.
Sierra's going to bring her the microphone. Hi. You can yell. I think we can hear you.
Are investors considered beneficial ownership? Do we have
You could. If you have a small business, and let's say that you have an investor who has more than 25% share in the equity ownership of that business, yes, you could be treated. There's some exceptions. There's a list of exceptions, about 20 long, that you should go through and check. But as a general matter, anyone who has ownership interest of more than 25% or exercises control, you can have a minority partner that has effective control, they get captured as well.
And loans are separate, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, unless there's some equity or power tied to the loan, but yeah.
Thank you.
I think, Sierra, I think this gentleman here, right here towards me.
Okay. Hi. So you mentioned AI and its impact on small businesses. So what would you say is the greatest opportunity for small businesses to leverage AI, and how quickly are they moving in this space right now?
They're moving incredibly rapidly. We have some polling we've done at the U.S. Chamber, and it's one of those things that the team brought back the polling, and it was the number of small businesses who are already utilizing AI, and I was like, that can't be right. That number is way too high. Are we sure about this? And it turns out it's true that you have close to a majority of small businesses who in some form or another are utilizing AI in some way. It doesn't mean they're using it massively. It may be someone's playing with it. But the number who intend to use it is also rapidly growing. And at least in my conversations with small businesses, when I ask the question, are you using AI? I am always incredibly impressed by the people who say, yeah, I just used AI to design my new marketing flyer. It got it about 85% right, and then I tweaked the last 15%, and it saved me a ton of time, or I didn't have to go out and use a service for that. And so I actually find that our small business members at the U.S. Chamber are more effectively using AI than our bigger company members. Our bigger company members, they can be a little bit afraid of it sometimes, and what are our rules, et cetera. Small businesses are just experimenting, growing. So I see it a lot in marketing. I see it a lot in, depending on the service, if they're in the service industry, if it's an intellectual service product, figuring out how to automate some basic things that they do, writing, for example. So those are the places that we're seeing it.
So this person who just asked you this question, I met him earlier. So he started a business that is specifically for small businesses. And what it does is you can tell his system, here's what I want my social campaign to be about this week, and you can just write it in your own words, and it will create an entire social campaign and schedule all of the posts across social media channels. So it's exactly what you're talking about.
Congratulate. That is, and think about the hours.
It was worth the trip now, wasn't it?
Think about the hours, though, that other small businesses would have spent. Social media is such a huge part of marketing for small businesses in particular, because you can really target the audience that, you're not wasting money on hitting people that aren't in your area, who don't care about your service or product. So small businesses spend a lot of time doing that, and now if you've relieved them of the time obligation of that, that's how you get efficient. So wonderful.
So
kudos to
if
you.
they want to follow you on Instagram, what is it? Hi Raver? Hi Raver. You can follow him on Instagram and learn about what he's doing. But don't worry, he'll be back as a sponsor next year.
I think we had a question right here.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Dr. Kat Schreier with Water Citizen. We do the Water Pitch Water Startup Matching Extravaganza, and often we're dealing with highly educated, highly specialized water professionals who are prepared for careers in large organizations. And if for some reason that doesn't work for you, caretaking responsibilities, health, whatever, it's not uncommon to become a contractor. And that all the risks is associated of getting dropped from a contract whenever. And so you get some that are going to create their own startups. So where is that line if someone, between a founding team, a contractor, an employee, when you're dealing with something that really deals with these highly specialized skill sets?
So between like a 10-9, what makes you a startup versus being a
Like
contractor?
a founding team versus a 1099 versus an employee.
Yeah. So it's a great question. And by the way, it's a great question because you'll see a lot of people start out as independent contractors and realize that they're really good at this and they can actually turn it into a business. But at its core, what you're talking about is an individual. So you're not talking about multiple individuals working under one firm doing services for other firms, so a B2B relationship. What you're really talking about here is an individual who may just be themselves providing services to different folks. So they're truly the single person, sole proprietor entity. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that, like, listen. There's when the government does these kind of things, like, people get really creative to figure out how to work around it. That's, by the way, a lot of wasted energy, but that's what happens. So I would not be surprised if people started doing that to try to work around the government's independent contractor rule.
That is all we have time for, so I want to say thank you.
Thank you.
This was very, very valuable. Let's say thanks to Neil. I think we're going that way.